All right, well, this is actually the last message in our Old Testament series. And I debated between a few different passages this morning. The Old Testament makes up about 75% of the Bible, and so there's a lot that we could talk about. There's a lot to talk about. But this morning I want to look at one of the most well-known prophets in the Bible, a man named Elijah. Elijah is known as a man who had great faith in God, but the reason that I chose for us to look at Elijah this morning and his story is something that I've talked a lot about in this series. Elijah is just a person. He's just a man. He's just a regular guy like you and me, and he's a person who learned to trust God. He's a person who grew in his faith, because faith is something that we all grow in. And when it comes to most things, we're so used to immediacy these days, right? We live in a society that demands immediacy. We want things right now. And our society doesn't have much patience for things that take time, things that require a process, or things that are slow. But faith really is a process. It's a lifelong journey. In Paul's second letter to the Thessalonian church, he comments how he's noticed their faith increase. He says in chapter 1, verse 3, we ought always to thank God for you, brothers and sisters, and rightly so, because your faith is growing more and more, and the love all of you have for one another is increasing. When speaking of Abraham, Paul says in Romans 4, no unbelief made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God. When we read the Bible, we think of people like Abraham, like Moses, like Elijah, as these great heroes of the faith. They're almost superheroes, right? But they were real people. They were real people like you and me. And they learned how to trust God. And what that means for us is that we can also learn to trust God. We can also grow in our faith. We can also do great things for God, because one of the biggest lessons we learn about these people in the Bible is that they weren't actually enough. They weren't enough. They didn't do great things because they had superpowers or super intelligence or some kind of quality that none of us have. No, they did great things because they followed a great God. They did great things because God did great things through them. We follow that same God. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the God of Abraham, the God of Moses, the God of Elijah. So Elijah first appears in the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 17. We know almost nothing about his life before his public ministry. By the time that God calls Elijah to the scene, there's been a civil war. The Promised Land has actually been divided into two countries, Israel in the north and Judea or Judah, sometimes it's referred to either one, in the south. And the king of Israel this time, he's a wicked man. He's a wicked man named Ahab. He's the one that Elijah is called to deliver a message to. 1 Kings 16 introduces Ahab. In verse 30 it tells us, Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. That was the capital city of Israel at the time. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So God sends Elijah to King Ahab to bring a message to him. And it says in chapter 17, this is where we're first introduced to Elijah. It says, "Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, 'As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word.'" So Elijah brings this message that there's going to be a drought in the land. And then immediately after this, God tells him to go and to hide. And we understand why later on when Elijah runs into Obadiah, another prophet, nearly 3 years later. Elijah stays hidden for nearly 3 years. And so what that tells us is that this is a drought that goes on for nearly 3 years. And it ruins pretty much all of the country. When Obadiah and Elijah run into each other, Obadiah is on orders from the king. He works for the king. He's on orders from the king to hunt for grass, a grassy area for the royal donkeys and horses to graze on. Elijah has been directed by God at this time to come out of hiding and to go back to Ahab to bring him another message to tell him that God will end this drought. And so these are the circumstances that Obadiah and Elijah are in when they meet. And Obadiah says to Elijah, this is chapter 18, verse 10, "As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord," he's talking about Ahab, "has not sent to seek you. And when they would say he's not here, he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you." So Ahab has been desperate to find Elijah these again, nearly 3 years because of this drought. And so when Elijah asks Obadiah to tell King Ahab that he would like to meet him, Obadiah is understandably nervous about that. But Elijah promises that he really does intend to meet with the king. He's not going to go back into hiding. And so Obadiah goes and he tells the king that Elijah would like to meet. And Ahab comes out and meets Elijah. In verse 17 of the same chapter, tells us, "When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, 'Is it you, you troubler of Israel?' And Elijah answered, 'I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals.'" And in Ahab's eyes, this drought was all Elijah's fault, right? And yet the whole reason for this drought is because of Ahab's sin. It's because of his father's sin and the sin of their whole house. 2 chapters earlier, when Ahab's father Omri is introduced, the Bible tells us that he did more evil than any of the kings before him. And then after Ahab takes over as king, the same thing's said about him. He's even more wicked than his father. Interestingly, though, Elijah doesn't mention the message that God had given him to tell Ahab that the drought's going to end. Instead, he says in verse 19, "Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So surprisingly, Ahab agrees to this, and all the arrangements are made. And what's about to happen is what Elijah is most known for, this showdown between the prophets of Baal and between him. But really, though, it's a showdown between the false god Baal and the real God, Yahweh. And so it's not much of a showdown. And Elijah knows this. He's not worried at all. He even comes across a little bit brash, as we're going to see in a minute. So they're about to have this showdown, and the terms of the showdown are that both parties are to build an altar. They're to take a bowl and to cut it up into pieces and to offer that bowl to their God. But the catch was that no one was to use fire. They were to call down fire, to pray for fire, pray to their God, to light the wood under the altar. Elijah says in verse 24, "And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, And the God who answers by fire, he is God. He's the one who's proving himself to be real. So they took the bowl that was given them and they prepared, this is the prophets of Baal, they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing or he is relieving himself." That means what you think it means. Or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their customs with swords and lances, and the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of oblation. The offering of oblation means the evening sacrifice. They did this all day, but there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Verse 30 says, "Then Elijah said to all the people, 'Come near to me.' And all the people," let me go to the next slide. "Come near to me." And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. 2 seahs of seed is about 3 gallons or 15 liters of seed. And he put the wood in order to cut the bowl in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." So something that we need to remember here is that this is in a drought. There's been almost 3 years of drought in this country. And so water is the most precious commodity in the land. And Elijah's telling them to fill up 4 big jars of water and just dump them on this altar. Verse 34, and he said, "Do it a second time." So they filled the 4 jars again. And they did it a second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, again, the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape." And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. So after this whole scene, Elijah tells Ahab, he finally brings the message that God had given him. He tells Ahab that the drought is over, rain is coming. And Ahab goes back to the palace and he tells his wife, Jezebel, what has happened, that all her prophets, all the prophets of Baal are dead. Verse 2 in the next chapter says, "Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, 'So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time of tomorrow.'" Basically, she's saying, "I'm going to kill you." Then he was afraid and he arose and ran for his life. So Elijah goes through this literal mountaintop experience. The prophets of Baal fail. They lose the showdown. God's power, his authority, his dominion have been proven. Why, after such a huge victory, does Elijah do a 180, it seems, and run away? Before this showdown, he had stood up to Ahab and brought him a message from God twice, 2 times. We didn't talk about this, but when he was in hiding, he sees the power of God demonstrated in a number of ways. Birds bring him food every morning and every evening. When he stays with a widow and her son dies, he prays that the son would come back to life, and God raises her son back to life. God also kept him safe that whole time. And so he's seen the power of God over and over and over. Why now is he running away in fear from Queen Jezebel? Well, I think there are some hints in the text as to what Elijah is thinking here. When the fire fell from heaven on Mount Carmel and consumed the burnt offering, we're told that the people fall on their faces and they proclaim Yahweh is God, the Lord is God, the Lord is God. But in this Old Testament series that we've gone through, we've seen the Israelites recognize who God is. We've seen them proclaim that he is God alone. And then the very next day, they're falling back into sin, right? So there's a very real possibility that there hasn't been any repentance. There hasn't been any heart change. This seems to be the case with King Ahab. He's kind of lived between two worlds, or at least he's tried to. He married Jezebel and he worshipped Baal with her. And I'm sure because of her, he's implemented this whole system in Israel to worship Baal in the country, and he's set up priests. They've set up idols around the country. But at the same time, Ahab still believes in God. He still believes that Yahweh is his God. During times of crisis, he still consults prophets of the Lord, like Micah. We read about that. And at the showdown, Elijah calls this out. He's talking to all the Israelites, not just the king, but he is talking to the king as well. And he says in chapter 18, we read this earlier, I'm going to read it in a different translation. He says, "How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." So Ahab has caused the country to have this divided loyalty between God and Baal. Because as their leader, he has a divided loyalty. He thinks he can serve both Baal and Yahweh, the living God. He doesn't see the conflict in that. He doesn't remember, or maybe he chooses not to remember, the very first commandment in the 10 Commandments, not to worship any other God. After Mount Carmel, King Ahab goes to his wife, and he says to her in verse 1, it says, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. And there's no mention of God. There's no rebuking his wife either. He lets her threaten Elijah's life. He allows her not to acknowledge the true God who's done this miracle on Mount Carmel. But he allows her to continue to serve her false gods. And so what I believe, and all of the commentators that I read when I was preparing this believe, is that Elijah believed the showdown on Mount Carmel would change everything. Ahab and Jezebel are not changed. And I think in Elijah's mind, at least, nothing has changed because of what has happened on Mount Carmel. So we're going to see in a minute just how disillusioned Elijah is. He's already overwhelmed by fear from this threat that Jezebel has threatened him with. And so he's on the run. Verse 3 again, he says, "Then he was afraid, and he rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba," which belongs to Judah, so as far south as he could go, "and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, 'It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers.' And he lay down and slept under a broom tree." So Elijah's afraid, he's tired, he's done. He's done with all of it. It didn't work out the way that he expected, and so he's done. Take my life, Lord. It's too much. He's traveled about 100 miles or 160 kilometers to get to this broom tree, probably by foot, so he's tired. And I'm sure the Mount Carmel incident was draining too, right? We don't think about that. He spent the whole day on top of the mountain, and then the very next day he's running for his life. He's physically and emotionally exhausted, but he's also disillusioned. God had done so much for him. He had seen God show up in power on so many occasions, but he seems to have forgotten. One commentator I read says it right: forgetfulness is the enemy of faith. We saw that with the Israelites over and over and over. They forget, and they complain, and they sin. And now Elijah, in his physical and emotional exhaustion, in his disillusionment, he's forgotten, and he's become hopeless. I'm guessing everyone here at one time or another has experienced hopelessness. We have a tendency as human beings to focus on the negative, right? For some reason or another, it's easy for us to be overwhelmed by the bad things that we experience and to forget the good that God has done for us. Elijah hasn't forgotten God, but he's let himself become overwhelmed by hopelessness. And so he cries out to God, "I'm done." And then he lays down under that broom tree. He just wants to die. So how does God respond to Elijah? Does he rebuke Elijah for forgetting everything that he's done for him up to this point? Does he punish Elijah for giving up? Does he grant Elijah's requests and take his life? No, Elijah isn't just a means to an end for God. He's not going to toss Elijah aside for giving up. He knows what Elijah needs. He knows that Elijah is tired. He knows Elijah better than Elijah knows himself, right? He's Elijah's creator. He's his father. Again, Elijah needs rest, and so God lets him sleep. And then he sends an angel, and verse 5 tells us, "Behold, an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.' And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, 'Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you.' And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God." So God knows he's tired. He knows that Elijah needs to rest, but he also needed nourishment. He also needed food. And so God provides for him, right? He's about to travel even further. We know a little bit about what that journey to Horeb would look like. Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. And so when the Israelites traveled through the wilderness, we know that there were springs of water along the way, and so we can guess that this is how Elijah stayed alive for 40 days and 40 nights. Why, though, is Elijah going to Mount Sinai? Well, we're going to find out. Verse 9. "There he came to a cave," so he's out on Mount Sinai and lodged in it. "And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" Again, God knows Elijah better than he knows himself. So God is prompting Elijah to speak his mind. Unfortunately, Elijah's still in this funk. Maybe he's come here to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, to get answers from God. He says to God in verse 10, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." So we can see by Elijah's answer, this is what despair does. It turns our focus inward. So he's talking all about himself. "Look at how passionate I've been for you, God. Everyone else has forsaken you. I'm the only one left. Was that really true? As far as we know, it was true that Elijah was the only prophet in the public eye, but Obadiah had told Elijah that he had hidden at least 100 prophets. So Elijah's not the only one left. His hopelessness has distorted his perspective. God tells him in verse 11, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rock before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. God doesn't try to argue with Elijah or even reason with him. Instead, he invites Elijah to encounter him. And God seems to be trying to teach Elijah through this encounter. God is not in the powerful forces that come. He's in the quiet. And so I believe that God is correcting Elijah's expectations. Dramatic displays of power were not God's only way of working. He was also in the quiet. He also worked in the quiet. God is about to end the worship of Baal, not through a display of power, but by orchestrating the end behind the scenes, in the quiet. But Elijah doesn't understand this right away. God asks him the same question, and Elijah gives the same answer. Behold, a voice came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He repeats himself, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." So again, instead of addressing Elijah's complaint, instead of trying to reason with him, God explains what he's about to do next and how Elijah is going to be a part of what God is about to do next. God says in verse 15, "Then the Lord said to him, Go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Maholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Elijah was disappointed that the showdown on Mount Carmel wasn't the end of Baal worship in Israel. It was a victory, but it wasn't the final victory. What I believe God is doing here, again, is correcting Elijah's expectations and giving him a right perspective. Elijah's not going to be a part of the final victory, but he has been and will be a part of the process of stamping out Baal worship and of pointing God's people back to God, back to Yahweh. God encourages Elijah by giving him a new perspective. I like what one commentator says. I'll put it up here. He says, Elijah needed to know that although he was a part of God's plan, he wasn't the plan itself. He was important, but not indispensable. So Elijah was playing an important role, but he wasn't the only one left. There were others who were faithful to God. There were others who were serving God and who were also a part of God's plan. Elisha is about to play an important role in God's plan. And God says there are 7,000 others who have refused to bow down to Baal and follow their king, King Ahab, by worshiping this other god. So there's more to Elijah's story. This isn't everything the Bible tells us about Elijah, but I'm going to stop here, and I want to ask, what can we learn from just this part of Elijah's journey, this part of his story? And one of the first things I think we can learn is that yesterday's victory doesn't ensure today's success. This point was too good, so I had to borrow this from one of the commentators I read. Yesterday's victory doesn't ensure today's success. Mount Carmel was a victory. The prophets of Baal not only failed, they were wiped out, right? And yet the very next day, we read about Elijah running for his life. That victory on Mount Carmel didn't guarantee anything. And it's the same with us. We have victories in our lives. We have mountaintop experiences, but neither the victories nor the high mountaintop can guarantee that we will have victory tomorrow. And the reason for this is because experiences don't sustain us. Overcoming one storm doesn't carry us through the next storm. The only thing, or rather the only one who sustains us, we all know, who carries us through the storm is our God. And I know you're probably very familiar with this passage, but it's so good I had to read it for you this morning. Psalm 23, just the first 3 verses. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Psalm 55, verse 22 says, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. The NLT translates sustain as he will take care of you. Romans 8, verse 35 says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. So we don't rely on past experiences to get us through. We rely on our God, right? We have to rely on him every single day. Jesus says in John 15, whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. Yesterday's victories aren't going to save us from today's problems. We have to rely on our God every single day. Something else that we can learn from this part of Elijah's story is that it's easy to lose perspective. It seemed like a lot of Elijah's frustration stemmed from wrong expectations and a wrong perspective. He became overwhelmed by his circumstances instead of remembering what God had done for him, who God was. He lost his perspective. He forgot. God is the one in charge, and there was nothing actually to fear. Also, Elijah may have thought that the victory on Mount Carmel would change everything, but it didn't. It was still a victory. Again, the prophets of Baal were wiped out. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. Israel's king still had a heart that was far from God. There was still more to be done, and God had a plan. Elijah, it wasn't time to give up. It wasn't time for Elijah to give up. Again, there were things to be done. Elijah was tired. He was physically, emotionally, spiritually even drained. He needed to rest. He didn't need to give up. But he put his trust in how he was feeling instead of in God. God was in control, despite how Elijah was feeling. I think we have this very high view sometimes of our feelings. We trust our feelings, but our feelings are as tainted by sin as any other part of us. And that doesn't mean that we should mistrust everything we feel, But at the same time, we need that big picture that we can't always trust what we feel. Elijah was legitimately exhausted, but he let that exhaustion control him and to cloud his mind. He gave into it. And he trusted his feelings over the God who had constantly proven himself to Elijah, had constantly proven to be his protector, his provider, his comforter. A final thing I think we can learn from Elijah's story is that God restores. Elijah isn't the only person in the Bible who gives up and wants to die. We saw a couple weeks ago that at one point, Moses also reaches his limit, and he says something similar to God. The Israelites were tired of wandering through the wilderness. They were tired of the manna that God had provided for them. They ate it every single day. And they're so tired of it that one day Moses hears so many people in their camp just weeping. They're so done. Numbers 11 says, this is Moses praying to God, "What did I do to deserve the burden of all these people? Did I give birth to them? Did I bring them into the world? Why did you tell me to carry them in my arms like a mother carries a nursing baby? How can I carry them to the land that you swore to give their ancestors? Where am I supposed to get meat for all these people?" They've been complaining that they don't have any meat. They keep whining to me saying, "Give us meat to eat. I can't carry all these people by myself. The load is far too heavy. If this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me this misery." So Moses is in a similar place to where Elijah was. He's tired. He's done. But God, right after this, God provides for him. And God had provided for him. God had provided for them, all of them, throughout the desert. The manna was provision. They were tired of it, but it was still provision. So God continues to provide. He does provide meat. Quail fly in from the ocean that night. And he tells Moses to gather 70 people to help him lead. And then he lays his Holy Spirit on those men to empower them to lead and to carry the burden with Moses. Some other examples, Job and Jeremiah are also men who go through difficult times, and at one point in their lives say something similar. They tell God they wish they had never been born. All of these men, though, may have been in despair, and for a moment they may have longed for death, but none of them take their lives. God carries them through the storm. God restores them. We see with Elijah, he goes on to mentor Elisha, and they form this strong bond, almost like a father and a son relationship. God does restore Elijah, and Elijah has the courage to confront Ahab again. He brings another message from God to Ahab. So anyway, all of this to say that you may be feeling hopeless this morning. Maybe you've also said, "God, I'm done. I can't take it anymore." Whatever circumstance you're in, though, it will pass. It doesn't seem like it in the moment. When we're in the middle of a storm, it seems like it's going to last forever. But if we look to God, he will carry us through, because God is in the business of carrying us through. He's in the business of restoring us. Psalm 147:3 says he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 23 verse 3 says he leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. And then Jesus says in Matthew 11, this is the NLT version, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Amen. Let's pray.